All right. Well, I hope everybody is really enjoying their coffee and dessert, and even more importantly, that conversation and networking opportunity that we talked about. Just the volume in the room makes me believe that we're all very engaged. So I am now super excited to give each of you a sneak peek into the latest and greatest happenings within the Arthritis Foundation. We are really happy to have with us Rick Willis, the Senior Vice President of the Arthritis Foundation's Field Management Team. He's going to give us a look into the Live Yes Arthritis Network. We also have Guy Eakin, Senior Vice President of Scientific Strategy at the Arthritis Foundation, who's going to speak to how we are evaluating our work in a new and a different way. And finally, last but not least, we have a panel of volunteers that will be moderated by Sue Schrent, Director of Patient Engagement. So give a nice round of welcoming applause to this team and take it away.
Thank you, Lori. You know, Rob is a very hard act to follow. Guy and I were just sitting down there discussing what our act was going to be and who was going to trip who when we came up on stage. So anyway, well, it's good to be with you here today. It's certainly been a tumultuous week, I guess you might say, for our nation. Who heard that we had an election this week, right? And but in times like these, it's good to be with friends and see some new faces and reconnect with some familiar faces. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we are gathered here this weekend on Veterans Day weekend. And so just want to acknowledge any veterans that we have in the room. Would you just stand so we can recognize you? I know there's some out there. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Well, what we're going to do here over the next hour and a bit is talk to you about where we are with this idea of the Live Yes Arthritis Network. And I was so excited to have Rob kick us off today because there's so much of his story that I hope that as you're learning more about the Live Yes Arthritis Network, that you'll see some of the same echoes and sentiments and the things that we're looking to create. And the thing that you might not know about Rob is that, you know, here's someone who has obviously has fought and is fighting his own battle with arthritis and certainly found his voice and has a gift for lifting spirits, but has turned to help the community, as we were talking earlier today, by forming the leadership board in San Antonio. So Rob, thank you for doing that. Please. So we have a varied audience here today. Some of you were with us in Phoenix when we were gathered last November and where we had the opportunity to begin to introduce this idea of the Live Yes Arthritis Network. But we also have a lot of folks where it's maybe very new to you. You've not heard about this yet. And so what we thought we would do over our time together is maybe just try to level set and catch you up on where we are and the progress that we've made over the course of the last year. When we were last together again in Phoenix, it was really an idea. It was an ambition. It was a vision, and we were convinced then, and become even more so today, that it's a must. This is something that we must do, and really laid down the charge for us when we were together last year. And I thought that maybe a good place to start might actually be by looking back for just a moment at what she had to say to us last year. So let's roll the tape.
You know, just as Jill was talking about, and as many of you in this room know, facing a diagnosis of arthritis is a horrible thing. It suddenly and abruptly changes your life. It calls into question everything you've hoped to do. You have to think every day about how you're going to manage this disease. And this is made worse because it's often invisible or misunderstood. It affects the entire family. And it often leaves people feeling isolated, angry, or worse, hopeless. Our mandate as an organization is to ensure that when people are diagnosed with arthritis, that they come out on the other side. They come out with a plan, a way of dealing with the everyday struggles, and that they're hopeful. It is our job to assist at the point of diagnosis, to show people that they're not alone, to help them make connections with others like themselves and with the resources of the foundation, showing them that not only can they live a good life, but they can help the entire community, that their insights will be able to benefit not just themselves, but others.
Now, I know that resonates with you, doesn't it? That's why you're here, is that it is our job, it is our mandate as an organization to make sure that when someone comes to us for help, that they do come out the other side with a plan, and that we know that they came out the other side of the plan, and that we were able to make a difference. And the fact of the matter is, we're actually doing, and again, I know that all of you would agree, we're doing great work now. So much to be proud of, right? We have an advocacy engine that is the envy of many organizations and is doing great work. We raised millions of dollars last year from our special events. We have scores of resources and millions of people that are coming to take advantage of them. And we know that even still, those tools and resources, when individuals come to take advantage of those resources, we know we're making a difference because of the research that we've done. And those patients who have come to the foundation have indicated that they experience increased quality of life over those who do not by being involved with the Arthritis Foundation. So you might be tempted to say then, so when it comes to the network, what's the problem? What problem are we trying to fix here? What is the Live Yes Arthritis Network really all about? And I would say that maybe a visual illustration for you that might be helpful is what you see on the screen here. The basic problem is essentially that when someone comes to the Arthritis Foundation, there really isn't a clear pathway to know, did they get the help that they came for? Did we make a quantifiable difference for them in the end? Did they leave with that plan? And I think certainly we could all agree that when they come to the foundation, they're going to see great content, and there's the potential for them to really connect with others who can help them. And actually, if I was to pause for a second, it's that connection that is really the life-changing work. It's what you all do in your communities. That's the life-changing work, the heartbeat of the Arthritis Foundation. The problem is that because there's not that clear pathway, much of what we do in terms of connecting individuals with the help that they need and making the connections happens more by chance than it does by design. So the question for us is, what if we could actually change the lives of millions? So I'm going to have a little audience feedback here. So you heard Bing say earlier, and this will actually be a test to see if everybody was paying attention to Bing. We had basically north of 20 million individuals who came to the foundation looking for tools and resources. And how many did you all hear Bing say that we had meaningful interactions with? About how many? About 1 million. So if you're doing the math, that leaves us what? About 19 million people who are at our doorstep looking for help and resources, and we really don't know if we've actually been able to connect with them. So what if we can move the needle on a percent, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5%? That would have a huge impact for us, wouldn't it? I think not only on the lives of those that we're here to serve, but on our organization as a whole. And so I hope that you can begin to see the great opportunity that we have before us. So if I was to summarize and sort of put it in a nutshell for you, what the network is really all about, the network is about making sure that we provide the tools and the connections and the resources to people when they need them, where they need them, the right tools to the right person at the right time, and we do that on a faster basis. And I think that the way to do that, as we can see, is by creating that personalized experience from day one. So how many of you subscribe to Netflix around here? Few people. When you go to Netflix, what do you got to do? What's the very first thing you got to do? You got to create a profile, right? You got to give them your name and your email address and where you are, because then you can tell them what it is that you like, and they can provide to you personalized and relevant content for what you want. And we have to do the same thing. And as we do that, and we create more value for the individuals who are coming to us, we believe they're going to want to stay, and they're going to want to be involved. And that's going to make the community grow. And when the community grows, we can listen and we can learn to what their needs are and what they're looking for and where we have gaps, and we can impact how care is delivered and influence our research agenda. But if we were to say, well, specifically, what areas are we trying to move the needle on based on the research that we've done so far? There's 3, and those are the ones you see on the screen. So it is around improved physical health, improved emotional and social health, and better experience of care. And I'm not going to go into great detail on them for you right now because my colleague Guy is going to do that for you very shortly. But based on those, if we were to say, so when you go back home and someone says, what's the network all about? What could I as an individual expect to get out of the Live Yes Arthritis Network? The promise is basically, in other words, by being a part of the Live Yes Arthritis Network, you're part of a community, and whether that's online or in person, where you can connect with others who can support and help and guide you and provide the advice and the hope and the empowerment. And we know that when that happens, when the hope and the empowerment comes, people feel more in charge of their own health care, and that in turn affects their emotional well-being, right? We all know that. But how? So how would we begin to do this? Well, there's three things that you have to understand in terms of how we see individuals coming to the foundation. They go through essentially sort of three general sort of milestones or categories, if you will. They start out, most people, as we said, millions of them, come to us through our website as information seekers. Now from there, obviously we have to improve. We're going to do, I alluded to Netflix earlier in the marketing automation. By improving our marketing automation engine, we can move individuals who come as information seekers on to be participants. And when we think about participants, there's sort of two ways a person can become a participant. They can choose to participate online or in their community, but either way, the key way that we move them to being participants is by creating better opportunities for connections, again, online or in communities. And lastly, once they move from being a participant, we need to accelerate our engagement of them so they become like you. They become champions, leadership board chairs, volunteers, event committee members, and so forth. So I have a short video that I think might actually illustrate this a little bit better for you. So I'm going to press play. We tried this in the board chair forum, and it sort of worked, sort of didn't, but I'm told that we're in good shape here. So we're going to go ahead and cue the video for you. Well, we left our board chairs hanging on the end of their seats earlier today, so they now got to see the finish of it, and I'm sure they're very happy about that. But I can tell you, here's the great thing. This isn't an idea anymore. it launched on World Arthritis Day. We began to put out some very creative and fun and different marketing tactics, and we've begun to attract new individuals who come into the organization. I hope who actually saw on social media and has been to the website, and if you haven't, go to the website and take the quiz, all right? But this has already started on World Arthritis Day. We're very excited about it. But I guess in wrapping up here before I hand it over to Guy, I want to just make a couple of quick comments. One is build a couple of fences. Some folks might be tempted to look at this and say, oh boy, this is another change. Is this a change? Is the Arthritis Foundation shifting directions? And the answer is no way. If you think about it, this is the logical next step to the great work that we've been doing. We talked about all the wonderful things that we do as an organization just a little bit ago. And so the beauty behind the network is it actually puts them all together and harmonizes them or synthesizes them for the benefit of the individual. So I'll give you an example real quick. So oftentimes when we travel the country and have a chance to visit with local markets, an idea will come forward and someone might say, hey, it'd be great if you had this tool or you had that resource. And many times we do have them. They're already there. They're on the website. Folks just don't know about them. So if we can do better by providing that relevant information to the person who needs it when they need it, we're going to bring together all that we do and make it work for the benefit of the individual. This does mean, however, that we do have to think about the work that we do a little bit differently. And so we have to think about what is the health of the network. So in your communities and in your markets, how many people, those information seekers and participants and champions I was talking about, how many do you have in your community? And I'm going to share with you a little bit later that tomorrow we're going to be looking at some of that data for you in your local markets. The other way that we have to think about moving the needle, though, is what difference is the network making, right? So how are we performing against those domains that I was talking about earlier? And Guy's going to share with you that very soon we are creating the environment where you will be able to know in your community how your community is reporting that they're performing against how they're doing in terms of experience of care, physical health, and emotional and social connectedness, which is going to increase your ability then to know how to best meet the needs of those in your community. If there was a but here, though, and I've been painting this picture of our vision, if there was a but, the but is this, and it does not happen with volunteers, and you might expect me to say something like this because this is a volunteer conference, right? But here's the reality is that I was sharing the board chairs earlier. I like cars, I'm a car guy, and so I sort of use this. To me, what we're talking about building here is like building a great car. It has the right paint color, it's got a great engine in it, sounds great, looks great. But if that car doesn't have wheels on it, it goes absolutely nowhere. So the network without volunteers, like a car, doesn't go anywhere. And the reason that we say that is that we simply cannot serve the people on the level and the scale that we're talking about here by staffing up. And the personal interactions that happen, the life-changing work, is what you all do. So truly, when we say that it doesn't work without volunteers, it truly doesn't. It's like a car without wheels. So I hope that what you're beginning to see and what you'll see through the course of the rest of the time together and through the conference, and I'll be back just to kind of help set the stage before we turn you loose for the expos, but I hope that what you're beginning to see is we have an extraordinary opportunity in front of us as an organization, a unique opportunity where the power of the community can come together to change how care is delivered. But in order to do it, we have to shift the way that we think, the way that we look at the business, and the way that we deliver programs on a local basis. So to do a little bit of a deeper dive for you on how we're utilizing data and creating that environment for you to know how to serve those in your community, I'm going to hand it over to Guy.
All right. Let's. They hid me in here someplace. So welcome. It's always a I've been talking to everybody today and saying it's nice to see you. It's nice to see you, and then to see all of you at once is actually a step above that, and it's really thrilling. So Rick talked about some of those domains that you see listed here at the top of the screen, and my goal here now is to say let's break those down. And ask the question of how do we simplify those? How do we ask what rolls up into those domains? And take a moment and imagine for yourself, what could I do to help another person, to help, in a way that would affect change? And what you can see here is a list of some pretty common experiences. things that we go through in all of our lives every day, and that we, in all our lives, have the opportunity to assist other people with. So with that in mind, we're going to continue to refer to these domains, but I just want you to have a sense of what actually goes into them. So what if we could measure now people as they go through life and associate with the Arthritis Foundation, live their own lives? What if we ask them the same structured questions, maybe every month? Well, every moment of yes, either in your personal life or in your actions with the Arthritis Foundation, begin to add up. And what we can do is start to give people a record where they can look back and say, hey, this was a moment in time when something worked, or this was a moment in time that there were challenges in my life, and really begin to identify what is it that helps people. And so it turns out we actually have the tools to measure these domains. And we just finished the launch. I'll give just a little bit of feedback, but we just finished the launch of what we're calling our Live Yes Insights program, which is patient-reported outcomes that really deploy some tools that actually, with a lot of research rigor, allow us to measure people's trajectories in exactly those domains we just talked about. And it's deceptively simple, because if you participated in our initial launch, you saw some pretty general questions. But it turns out that what a really immense amount of research has told us is that the patterns of how people answer those questions can be mapped back to actually how they're doing on those big domains that we talked about. We can understand what challenges people are having with that physical health, mental and social health, as well as the experiences they have in affecting the best conversations with their doctors. So many of you in this room have already been contributing to that data, and I'm really excited. In a couple minutes, I'm going to show you some of that data. But before we get to that, what I'd like to do is remind of what the goals are. Why are we doing this? And so first and foremost, the goal here as we deploy this Live Yes Insights program is to begin to give people a way of talking about arthritis in a way that's a common language with the doctors and healthcare community. That's the first and foremost goal. And then if we're successful in that, then we can begin to aggregate that data at the Arthritis Foundation and begin to deploy more tailored programs to our communities. So in a way that it's not now one size fits all, but we really have a deeper understanding of what's going on and we're taking the pulse of our individual communities. And of course, the next step on that afterwards, after we're able to achieve those first two missions, is the third mission of partnering with our research and healthcare provider communities to deliver new insights that actually change the culture of care in our communities. So what we remember as we talk about all this, we're putting numbers on arthritis, and I can stand up here and I can tell you what my cholesterol numbers are, I can tell you what my blood pressure is, and that tells you a little bit of a story about what I'm going through, in my life, but we don't have those types of numbers for arthritis. And so those would be numbers that allow us to take those very difficult concepts, those big domains that we're talking about, and tell a story that other people understand about what it is that we in our lives are going through. And so what you're going to see very soon is dashboards, is an ability to take a look at a long-term record of your experiences in these Live Yes Insights. And for some people, it'll be very simple, just like you get with a child's standardized tests, report, or your energy bill. For other people that want more, there'll be opportunities to get a better drill down on comparing your own experiences to a reference population that you help determine. So if you're living with a pediatric arthritis, or if you're living as a young person with arthritis, perhaps you don't want to compare yourself to an elderly population with osteoarthritis, and vice versa. So those tools are becoming available soon, and we hope that they stimulate conversations with your doctors about co-producing healthcare. But this tells us this begins to tell us more of a story than just the stories about ourselves. It's also a part of a movement to see how communities differ from one another in a way that we really haven't been able to do. We can now start to begin to tell a story, and this comes from real data. This comes from these surveys that we've been sending out over the last couple of weeks. Tell the stories about where communities are succeeding and where they're having challenges. And so we're going to take some examples here. So what you're seeing on this dashboard are things that are in development, but will be deployed to local markets quite soon. In this case, we're going to focus on two markets. Detroit. We have anybody here from Detroit? Saw a couple on the. All right. So we got one person. Maryland. I'm Maryland. All right. So why do we have fewer numbers on the Maryland, on the 53 people in Maryland and 117 people in Detroit? Thank you, Detroit. But at any rate, what we want to say is, as we start to look at these communities, let's drill down on those numbers. And what we can begin to see is that actually Maryland, if we begin to break down, is actually doing quite well. You probably can't see at the bottom, but these are comparisons of a local market to the region and to the nation. And Maryland's really performing at the national average for social roles and activities and a health in that domain. And it complements the successes and challenges that are being seen in Detroit. And so these groups now can go back and look at their own data and ask the question of what that means for their communities, and then come into meetings like this and share that and ask, well, what is it that's breeding success in your community, and how can we learn from each other? You'll hear the term learning health system coming up a lot, and that's the essence of what it is, that we can learn from each other about, in using this data. So let's expand this a little and ask, what does it actually look like to use this data, and how do we arm our volunteers in a way that actually makes them able to go out and implement on this data? And so here you have, if you imagine yourself as that little green figure in the middle of the slide, that's a volunteer, that's a network leader. And some of you I've met here even in this meeting over the last two days, that have that role now. It's a new role within the Arthritis Foundation. So this is a volunteer leader who's looking at that data that's coming out of these Live Yes Insights surveys and saying, you know what? This tells me that my community has a problem in mental and social health. And so everything's going to work well if we go back and remember that first slide that I told you about. So on that slide it says, you know what, we know that there's a few things that roll up into that social and mental health. Companionship, if we can help people with their anxieties, depression, hope, if we can give each other support, if we can find social roles and elevate how we support each other in our community, well then we would expect, if we deliver those programs, to see a movement on that mental and social health needle. And so in this case, this volunteer has that idea, is going to focus on that domain, and in her case, she's going to decide to offer a networking event in her community. And as that intentional programming happens, we expect that she's going to, over time, begin to see changes in her community on that mental and social health. So this is really about how we start off telling a story about ourselves and contribute to helping our communities. It's not just about planning events. You can ask yourself, how else might I go into my community and use this data? If you're a healthcare provider, have you ever seen data like this for your specific catchment area, for your community? For our volunteers, take this data to your community. Begin that conversation of co-production that isn't just about your own health, but is about supporting your community. Same with public health agencies within your local communities. They haven't seen this data either, and it can be very helpful. So returning to that idea of the dashboards that was showing the Detroit and Maryland, as we build this program, like I said, we are growing it from stories about people's own lives and beginning to paint a picture now of a very rich painting of our country. And so it's defined, and I think this is important, that this image that we're getting is defined not by data that comes from surreptitiously looking at claims records or looking into some government databases that we have about lives lived with arthritis. It supplements those. This is a story told by people with arthritis about themselves that builds as part of a movement. So what I'd like to do is take another step back and talk about the bigger strategy. And so in the last year, we've been talking at the Conference of Champions about some work we're doing with electronic medical records. That's continuing, and that's continuing successfully. But that program has to be fueled by having data like these patient-reported outcomes. And at some point, those two programs will merge. But in the meantime, we also need our volunteers out there, and again, not just using this data for themselves, but using this data for their community, building this culture of co-production within the Arthritis Foundation's Live Yes network, to actually create that field, to prep our communities, our professional communities, for that time when we can actually bring all of these projects together. And because, what we're talking about here is really this kind of idea that starting as simply as filling out a survey, you're really doing a triple play here. You're creating better health records, you're supporting your community, and eventually you're helping to drive a research agenda. So in my last few minutes, what I'd like to remind you of is that there's a research agenda that's supported by driving with data, which is what the last sort of 10 slides that I've shown you have been about. But there's other ways of driving a research agenda. And I want to focus on a few individual people who have driven that agenda. And so if you're looking at the slides now, you see on the left some conversations about osteoarthritis, and on the right some conversations about juvenile idiopathic arthritis that were presented in front of the Food and Drug Agency, so the FDA. And what I want to remind you is what's special about this is that, go off script just a little bit, anybody can bring 10 people to a room with the FDA, but in this case, all of these people who went and advocated in the halls of power, were supported and presented the data that came from the community, from the insights that you've been filling out, and you've been helping the Arthritis Foundation come to understand. And I'm very proud to say that all of these people advocated successfully. Just in the last 2 months, for the group on the left there, the osteoarthritis program, the FDA, after 18 years, 2 months ago, delivered new guidances for industry, which means new guidances for the pharmaceutical companies and drug developers, that directly references what happened in that conversation that you're seeing there. And so, we certainly applaud the advocates who were part of those panels, but they were also supported by all the contributions of the surveys, of the insights tools that many of you in this room were a part of. And so, I think this is important, and it's so important that as part of our agenda here, we'd like to actually turn the next part of our session over to hearing from some of those advocates in their own voices. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Sue Schrant, to come up and take us through the next part of the session.
Well, good afternoon. I'm a little bit shorter than Guy, so let me get in the right place here. Well, it's great to be with all of you, and as you've heard, we are so excited to really celebrate and empower our volunteers. We want volunteers at the helm of what we're doing, as leaders, as facilitators, and then, as you just heard, as contributors of data and of insights and of their stories. It's really our community of volunteers who is going to grow the Live Yes Arthritis Network to meet the millions of people we want to meet. When we reach those millions of people and they get connected and start engaging and start contributing those data and those insights, that's a really powerful tool. You just heard Guy talk about how we can use that data and those insights to make sure we are providing the most relevant and targeted programming and resources that we can to our communities, kind of making that link. You heard how we can actually use the data and the insights to change the way healthcare is delivered, to change the way research is done, to change the way drugs are developed. I mean, that is really powerful. So it's exciting to think about this whole community coming together, led by volunteers, and then really driven forward with those data and those insights. So we're really fortunate to have a panel of volunteers here today who are doing a little bit of all of this. They are leaders, they are facilitators, they are contributors of the data that we are going to use and that can be so powerful. They are probably known to many of you. We have Lisa Diven and Liz Smith, Deb Constein and Connie Masulo. They're actually going to stay here at the table, but they're going to be projected like the movie stars that they are onto the big screen. And so we're actually going to have our dialogue with them seated there. So I want to start with something Guy touched on about the importance of collecting this health data, that people can contribute their own health information, kind of track and monitor disease symptoms, and how that can be valuable to you to use as an individual. So I actually want to start with you, Lisa. Maybe if you can share how a tool like that could be powerful and useful to a patient.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been dealing with rheumatoid arthritis for a really long time, but this past year has been really difficult for me. It involved trips to dozens of different doctors and specialists, so many different symptoms, not just the pain, but fatigue, headaches. And there were so many times that I found myself sitting in a doctor's office and trying to reconstruct that picture and trying to remember, when did the headaches start? Okay, when did we start this medication? And so many times that's just such a difficult thing to do in that moment, where I wish I had a way to look back and try to really have accurate information to give the doctor so that they can really assess the situation. So having something like that, even now, I know I should be writing it down, and I don't, because it's not easy and I don't take time to do it. But if I had a tool that was easy to use, I would be much more likely to do that.
That's so helpful to hear, and it is important that it's easy and that it's quick and that we can enter it in that quick way. So it really speaks to the value of having that information collected in one place, I think. Liz, I'm going to turn to you because as a parent, you might have a different perspective on how this could be valuable. Could you share with us what that would look like for you?
Sure. So for us, I think as parents, it's very helpful. We were told to empower our daughter when she was diagnosed 24 years ago at the ripe old age of 2. So at 2, that meant choosing her own Band-Aid or putting her Band-Aid on by herself. Now we can take these technologically savvy kids and start them using this tool right away to make them be partners in tracking their own care. And that eventually, as they get older, becomes a wonderful tool in the transition piece, because we want them to start to be independent in their care and move on to adult care. So we're providing an easy way for them to do that.
That's a great point, and I think we can probably learn a lot from young people about embracing the technology, maybe even asking for help, how we use it. They seem to really pick it up at an early age. So really important that it could help with that transition bridge. So thank you for sharing that. So we've heard a little bit about using it at your individual level for your own health, your own disease management. Let's kind of take it up to the next level. And again, Guy talked about how we can use data and insights as fuel for making sure we are connecting people with the resources and programs that are most relevant to them and what that looks like. So I'm going to start with you, Deb. I know you recently were involved in a project that really looked at this link between needs and resources. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the Arthritis Foundation asked me to go to Tampa and actually help present a poster that was based on some surveys that were done. It had 3 questions that were asked of the ambassadors and advocates, and what they did was they correlated the findings directly towards tools that already existed through the Arthritis Foundation. The first question was based on what was the biggest barrier for patients in access to medication and into healthcare. And the findings were 40% responded that prior authorization was a big barrier, as what followed very closely by high deductibles. The second question was, and then we looked at that and tied it to a tool that we already have, which is called the Prescription for Access tool, which is right online. The second question was the biggest arthritis challenge that people faced. And not surprising to anybody in this room, but 79% said that it was managing their pain. So again, that's another tool we have, breaking the pain chain. So bringing to light that information. Third question was related to compliance. So what was the difficulty for patients in taking their medication as prescribed? And 54% said that it was related to the side effects and actually how the medications made them feel. So that's why they would skip. So, so then again, our tool is the Better Living Toolkit, as well as our helpline, our 24-hour helpline that we have. So great opportunities. And the response was only 1,800 people, roughly about 1,800 people. And can we imagine what thousands of people, impacting the data in these avenues? So
yeah, that's really exciting to think about. And it's just great to see that we can make those linkages. We identify the need, we can put the resource or program into place. So I think that's such a critical piece. Connie, I want to shift to you now, and just talking about sort of the importance of that. Why does it matter to listen to your community, and how does that impact the work that you do?
It's so exciting to hear, and now that I see the slides, it's even more exciting to see that the numbers would be quantified, because there are sometimes gaps in service, and I noticed through my years of volunteering that we didn't always acknowledge the mental health and social piece. We missed a domain, and not always, there's some stuff, but we focused a lot on the medical piece, and now in the past year we've been focusing a lot on adding that mental health and social piece to make sure that you take care of that one domain, because as we all know, one interlocks with the other, and that's probably why they were chosen, right? Because a lot of the physical symptoms are signs of depression as well. So if you have high pain and you have a significant disease, and then you're also experiencing depression, it'll make the symptoms amplify. So it's really important to address all of it. So we've been trying in certain ways. We had a topic on JA Family Day on social and emotional needs of the community, and I think it's just so exciting to hear from the people actually experiencing it, what, if anything, we're missing.
That's great. Thank you, Connie. I think at that community level, this is just a great resource, right? To have this data, have these insights, so that we can be able to target what we're offering. So great response there. So now we've talked about the individual level, the community level, and let's go one step bigger, and Guy touched on this as well, that we can actually change the world a little bit. We can change the way healthcare is delivered. We can influence the FDA clearly. We can change the way research is done. So I'm going to ask a few of the panelists about that piece, about what it feels like to be part of a movement where contributing your stories, your insights, your data actually changes things. And so, Liz, you were a part of the JIA, Patient-Focused Drug Development meeting that Guy described. Can you share a little bit about what it was like to be invited to that table and to share your perspective?
Sure. I think for all of us who were at that table, it was very empowering to have our voices heard by FDA and industry leaders. Our voices as parents or as patients can impact the way drugs are developed and the way they're delivered. And I think that's a huge, huge deal. Sometimes I feel like when you sit in the doctor's office, the doctor looks at the patient and says, wow, this is great. You can get up and you can get out of bed all by yourself. But as a patient or a parent, you look at the physician and say, that's not good enough. I don't want to just get up and get out of bed. I want to get up, get out of bed, and run that marathon that was referenced earlier, something you may have never done. And when patients and caregivers are heard, these are the kinds of things that will happen. We've just come so far from sit down, be quiet, you're the patient, everybody else knows what's best, to becoming valued partners or valued experts in the room with drugs and all of it. So.
That's right. Well, thank you. And I think that day really demonstrated the power of all those levels of data that Guy talked about. So we had survey data, focus group data, but then we had those very personal stories and insights. And I think that just really moved the dial. So we're excited to see what comes from that. Deb, you had a similar experience sort of in the research and drug development space. Can you talk about what that was like to contribute and lend your voice?
Sure. So about a year and a half ago, there were 3 patients that were asked to go to Phoenix and be part of a panel. It was a patient panel. It was for a launch of a new drug for a pharma company. And there were thousands from this particular company. There were thousands of drug reps. There were the scientists, the researchers were there, the managers. I mean, everybody was there. So there were thousands of people in the room. And there was a moderator that would ask us questions just about our everyday life and what it was like to have arthritis. And I've had it since I was 13, so it was a long time. And the other 2 panelists could speak to their own personal experiences. They took a break after that panel, and we were mobbed coming off of, that we couldn't even leave the stage without, so many people, they saw that I was from Wisconsin, so the Wisconsin people were there, and then scientists and researchers, they were looking at us and said, you are the face that I put to why I do my work. So now I have a face to why I work so hard and make new medications, and it was powerful. It was just an amazing experience, and they hadn't had that experience before, and it was just really empowering, and just to walk a day in our life through our experiences.
Sure. That's such a great story and great way to capture it. And, just having 3 patients in the room telling your stories is going to ripple out to the whole community, because it's going to change the way those researchers, those scientists look at what they're doing. It's going to make the pursuit of treatments that we need different and more relevant to patients. And so it's great to see that live and in action. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit now. We've heard about this power of contributing data, contributing insights, sharing stories, how we can use that at the individual level, at the community level, to change the world. But how do we get there? We can really only get there by having volunteers leading the charge. And I mentioned earlier, we know that growing the Live Yes Arthritis Network to reach sort of its full glory, its full capacity, is going to require a large group of activated, dedicated volunteers. We just simply don't have the numbers of staff to be in every community where the millions of people that come to us for resources work and live. And so it really requires and depends on that passion and that fire from our volunteer leaders. So I want to ask now a few panelists to just talk about what it's like to be one of those leaders, one of those facilitators, taking charge, doing the work, getting out to the communities. So I'll start with you, Connie, just about what it's been like to sort of be empowered to be a leader in this area.
It's been an amazing experience. We did have a meetup for the families, and we had a really good turnout of new families and older, more experienced families with the Arthritis Foundation. And it was a great spot for them to meet up and discuss what they're going through. We had a speaker as a pharmacist, and to be able to talk with the families about medications or complications that they might be personally having. And that was powerful. And it was great. The pharmacist left saying that he was so impacted, kind of similar to what the scientists were saying too. It was a face to what the work that they're doing. And it was really incredible for him to see what the families are experiencing on their level. And it was great for the families to meet up. I know for me, I needed that support in the beginning, and I was the new mom, coming and needing help. And there were a lot of families who helped pull me to the other side. And now it's been wonderful to be able to pay that forward and do it for other people now that we're okay. And I watched my daughter go from not being able to participate in dance to have to hold on to the teacher to do the moves, and now she's on the competition dance team. So it's so nice to be able to see that, and we did step over to the other side and to help new families with their journey as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Connie. And I'm seeing several layers of benefit. There's benefit to the people who participate, but there's benefits to the volunteers who are leading it. They feel those sort of rewards and that benefit. And even the subject matter experts are getting benefit from being involved. So a lot of layers of good stuff happening. And Lisa, I want to bring this question to you as well. I know you've got a couple different perspectives to lend here, so I'd love to hear your insight.
Sure, I can speak about the importance of volunteers both as a Live Yes Network leader as well as a nonprofit leader myself in my career. There's always a finite amount that the staff can do. It will always be finite no matter how much staff you hire, there's a limit. But when you get volunteers involved, the impact can become exponential because you get a volunteer involved and then they get other volunteers involved, and it can continue to grow and I think really realize the vision that you guys are talking about. And then I think the other important thing is, one, what Connie touched on is important, is that the volunteer themselves, I know I've already made amazing connections in the last year of leading this Live Yes initiative in Kansas City, but also volunteers that are experiencing the disease or are affected by the disease in one way or another, I think bring a unique perspective when they're leading the groups and leading the connectives, leading the meetups. They can really impact the way that it is within their community because they've lived it and they can really feel it.
That's great. That's such an important perspective. I think you said it perfectly. So we really can't do this without our community of involved, empowered, engaged volunteers. We can't do any of it. The contribution of the data, the insights, the stories, that comes from all of you, and the leadership comes from all of you. So with that, I want to invite you to help me thank our patient panel.
Good job, guys. Good job.
Well, thank you, Guy, and thank you, Susan. Thank you to our panelists. And I hope that over the course of the short time that we spent here together, whether you've heard of the network already and you came with a base of knowledge, whether it's new to you, I hope that you've got a clear picture of what we have in view. And so in just a few minutes, we're going to get you up on your feet and get you out to the afternoon expo sessions. But I thought maybe I would just take a minute to be able to talk us through really the real question for all of us here today, which is, are we ready? Are we ready? In your community, as you think about going back home and talking about the Live Yes Arthritis Network and putting it into action, and as I said already, we've launched. It started on World Arthritis Day, and in many ways, there's many things we've been doing around the network that have been going on all along. So really, the question is, are we ready in our communities? And if you're hearing this for the first time, you might be thinking, no, I'm not ready. And so that's okay. That's what the conference is about. And so I just thought that maybe I'd just take the last 5 to 10 minutes that we have here together just to try to set up for you how this conference has been designed, because I think you would find it to be very different if you've been with us before, a very different kind of conference. And there's a few things when it comes to readiness that if you're not quite tracking, if you don't get them, it's going to be like missing the first button on the shirt, right? And so the rest of the conference isn't going to make sense. So I think that when we talk about readiness, there's 4 things we need to be thinking about. The first one is community offerings. So when we're bringing, and as we're bringing new people through the network and introducing them to communities, there has to be a way to greet them and to help connect them. And we believe that that's something called a Live Yes Connect group. Now, you just heard us reference the term meetup, and if you've been tracking for a while on the network, you would have heard that term before. And some of us are very fortunate to have had an arthritis support network a support network meeting in our communities. And we brought the best of both of those ideas together to form what we're calling Live Yes Connect groups. And so this afternoon, what is important for you is that when you go to the expos are designed to give you, if you've already got a former ASN meeting or now a Connect group going on in your community, terrific. If you don't, or even if you do, actually, the expos are designed to give you some sort of a starter kit, if you will, in terms of content that you could take back, that you could pull off the shelf, and that you could implement in your Connect groups, in your communities, based on what you learn about their needs. The second component of readiness has to do with messaging, and it's really as simple as it sounds and as straightforward, which is, do the people, the key stakeholders in your community know about the Live Yes Network? For our purposes today, and for the purposes of the conference, we really are zeroing in on messaging to leadership boards. Does your leadership board know about the network, and do they understand their role in the network, where they can help connect with others who come in and help meet their needs, and where they can evaluate gaps that are going on in the community about where do we need more Connect groups, or what is the content the Connect groups are bringing forward. So your leadership board should really be intersecting about what issues the Connect groups are talking about. And so this afternoon, when you come back from the expos, this afternoon's plenary session on hot topics is really designed to share with you from a couple of experts some of the, we only have time for 2, so some of the very key topics that we're hearing from the arthritis community already, which is around nutrition and around access issues. So we have some great panelists who are are going to be with us this afternoon to kind of talk through those issues and what some of the resources are that the foundation has to offer on that front. The third you've already heard a whole lot about, and that is around volunteers. I think you've certainly heard that we believe very strongly and are convinced that the network will not move forward without volunteers. And so there's a few roles that we have envisioned, some specific roles. We don't just want to say, hey, it's got to be powered by volunteers and then turn you loose. We want to provide some structure for that. So we have a few new roles that are envisioned as part of the network and as part of the leadership board. Tomorrow morning, we're going to hear from volunteer extraordinaire Steve Smith. Where's Steve? So he's local J dad, and Steve is going to talk us through some great content that he has around recruiting and retaining volunteers. And I've heard a lot from many of you in the room about, well, we get it, volunteers are important. How do we find more of them? And tomorrow morning, Steve's session is really designed to help walk you through that. And then the last session, the last component of readiness that we have, I should say, is around measures. So the idea here is that how many Connect groups should you have? How do you know if you have the right number of volunteers, network leaders, facilitators going on in your community? Well, that's going to be based on what the pool, if you will, looks like of how many information seekers do you have coming in and how many participants. And so tomorrow afternoon, in the breakout sessions, we've got you broken out by market size so that you can begin to look at the first cut of that data for your market. And then you would be able to dialogue with volunteers and your staff partners from like-size markets to say, well, what do we make of this and how do we develop a plan to move forward, and what are one or two things that we could do when we go back home. And so I guess just in conclusion, I wanted to wrap up. I hope that you can see and that you can feel that what we're talking about here is a movement. Someone said it earlier, I think it was Suze might have said something about building a movement, and I was reminded in preparing for today of a quote that I saw from the late Paul Allen. I think many of you might have seen this quote going around, but it says, as long as we work together with both urgency and determination, there are no limits to what we can achieve. And so I'm going to channel my inner Rob Weichel, and I'm going to ask you all, who believes that our cause is urgent? Let me hear from you if you believe the cause is urgent. And I guess more importantly, who is determined? Who is determined to do something about it? Let me hear you if you are determined. So then I believe, and I know that you do as well, that there are no limits to what we can achieve. So let me tell you about what we're going to do this afternoon. If you look this way, to my right, your left, we're going to dismiss you into the afternoon expos. I want you to understand, though, that the meeting rooms are actually divided up. There's 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So you can see on the screen that we have 4 that we're offering: the Live Yes Cooking, recruiting subject matter experts, a facilitator-led education event, and advocacy and action. You did not register for these, as you know. Normally we would have asked you to select them. We wanted it to be kind of free-flowing. So you're going to have the opportunity to see 3. It'll be a little bit like speed dating. So we got 30 minutes each, and you choose the one you want to go to. There is no registration. If the room is full, go on to the next one and catch it on the next rotation. But you do need to know that the rooms are split up, 2 on each side, and there will be volunteers out in the hallway to direct you. And so I hope you enjoy your afternoon, and we'll see you back here for the plenary session for the hot topics. Thank you.